You're listening to the Dudes and Dads Podcast, a show dedicated to helping men be better dudes and dads by building community through meaningful conversation and storytelling. And now, here are your hosts, Joel DeMott and Andy Lehman.
Joel, it is so good to be back in studio. We had to skip last episode.
Yeah.
We were both just so busy with family, and that's okay because that's what this show's about, is family. So
100%. Andy, I got to say, you look rested.
I think
you look
so.
well. Have you been out in nature?
I've been outside.
Good.
I don't know about nature.
If any of you have been following, Andy and his eldest son Micah have been doing some outdoorsy stuff.
Yeah, Micah actually has a YouTube channel called Survive It, and I'll link that in the show notes.
You should. Are you wearing his swag right now, too? It looks similar.
No, it looks similar, but it's not.
Yeah, Micah's got swag. He's got some shirts.
Yeah, so we've been doing some shows and episodes on producing that stuff about surviving and hammocking and things like that. So.
Yeah, I enjoyed the double-decker hammock situation that you had going on, and it really inspired me. So
it was fun.
That's good.
You should get a hammock.
Yeah, as for us, some of you may have seen, we were up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and doing some camping up there. And we had a couple of rough weather days while we were up there, and that inspired my 6 installments, if any of you saw it.
Yeah, but it was amazing.
You appreciated my 6 installments of fake Michigan history. And this, I don't know if this is a commentary on where we are as a society. When I came back here to Indiana, I had several pretty deep level conversations about so how much of that was true and how much of it was false.
And you're like, absolutely none of it.
Yeah, I said the only thing that was accurate were the occasional date and a name that I maybe inserted in there that was from somebody from the area or the time. But it was a lot of fun, and so now I have requests for more. I've kind of regret it now because people are like, you need to start doing fake histories on other places.
I'll be honest though, when I was watching them, I was like, is that real or not?
Right.
It was so.
Yeah.
You did a very good job, and those of you who are not friends with Joel on Facebook, do it.
Let's fix that.
Yeah,
sure.
Become friends because he has those there, and it was amazing. But hey, Joel, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Hey man, what's brewing? What's brewing?
Hey,
what is
brewing?
We have a new intro there for that one.
That was Josiah introing my son Josiah. Did an excellent job. Josiah's actually hanging out with us tonight. He's
in the room.
He's listening in.
What is brewing, Joel? For those of you who don't know, we drink coffee during this show normally, and we also talk about kind of what's going on in our life. So what's brewing?
What's brewing with me, Andy, is we are preparing for another getaway with my side of the family on beautiful Lake Michigan here in a little while.
Are you going to be doing fake news?
Oh, you know what? I hadn't even considered. I guess next, you heard it here first, folks. Next installments are coming at you. But we're going to be up north of between Holland and Grand Haven, spending a week. And let's see, we got baseball going on. We're coming on to the All-Star season here sooner than later. And then some travel ball stuff with my eldest son, so that's good. Baseball and Andy, Major League Baseball is about ready to begin, and it's not going to be the same. I know you don't even really care about baseball.
I don't.
But for me, there's a level of joy and excitement. Even if there are no fans, the fact that I get to see baseball is good. So. I am just in the midst of obviously what has been a challenging season for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are things that I am holding on to and saying I am enjoying them. They are good. They are life-giving, and that's what I would encourage everybody to do. Look for the things that are life-giving things. So yes. So with that, you and I are not currently don't have a cup in front of us. Quite honestly, it was 83 degrees in the studio when we got here, and it's cooling down now. I wasn't in the coffee mood, but our guest this evening is also a coffee drinker.
He is, and so why don't you introduce our guest tonight?
I will. So with us this evening, we have Dr. Jon Swanson, who is, how should I say this? Jon was recommended to me. It makes him sound like he's like a medical doctor. Jon was recommended to me. He was going to prescribe me something. Mutual friend that we have years ago, Jon has held many roles. He is currently a staff chaplain at Parkview Health in Fort Wayne. And Jon, you aren't the main hospital, it's like the main hospital, right? Right. Yep.
Right. Parkview Regional.
Yes. And so you've served as a staff chaplain there. We're a little over the 4-year mark, if I am correct. Yes.
Exactly.
And so, but he's also the senior consultant at Arbor Research Group, which means he does fancy researchy things. And then you can tell us more about that later. Has previously served as an executive pastor, also in the Fort Wayne area for several years, and he's a solid dude. He's also a dad. You and your wife have been married for how many years now, John?
I always say since '83.
You would
That
say
way I don't have to remember the number.
I would say since.
I like that. I might have to take a
I
better
think
approach.
I learned
Yeah.
something. I have been married since. That's beautiful. That's good. But we wanted to have John on the show, obviously, for many reasons. He has recently published another book that I think is going to be helpful. But John, also you do have a cup in front of you right now. You're drinking some coffee, and he's done a special blend. What are you drinking here, John?
It's 2/3 Starbucks House Blend Decaf and 1/3 Morning Joe Starbucks, which used to be Starbucks Gold Coast.
Gotcha.
So,
They changed it.
yeah, they did, and it's French pressed. So
Gotcha. That makes it fancier. And,
it does.
And I will say there's to the 2/3 and 1/3. He's taken the edge off a little bit with the decaf, but he's just got to.
He still has just a little
bit of something
that.
in there.
Yeah,
That's good.
Exactly.
Good. Well, John, this is. There's so many things when we were thinking through what we could talk about tonight. I do want to begin with a conversation about your most recently published book and kind of dive into that a little bit. And then there's other things we can talk about beyond there because I just think, as we discussed beforehand, there's for any of you who have ever been in the hospital or been in you've engaged with a chaplain, that experience. Usually if a chaplain is in the room, it's because something serious is going on, right? And that can have a variety of contexts, but there seems to be a lot of mystery about chaplaincy, about what it is you guys do, because there's a lot of components to it. But then there's also, I think, some unique perspective that chaplains have, and so we want to, I think, dive into some of that too. But before we do, John, you've just released this book. It is available on the Amazon and Kindle and all, which thank goodness for the Kindle, because I was able to read some of it ahead of time. Give us the title, all the good stuff. Just give us the info about the book, and then I've got some questions I want to ask you about it.
It's called God, We Need You, A Year of Prayer in a Hospital Chapel. And I do the Sunday morning service in our chapel every week. And so about 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, I moved from extemporaneous prayer into a more formal written prayer through the year C of the lectionary. So it starts with Advent, and then it goes through the Sunday after Thanksgiving, Christ the King Sunday. And so I had shared those prayers in the chapel, shared them on 300wordsaday.com, which is my one of my websites. And I realized that it was probably worth gathering those prayers together and sharing that with people, because lots of times we need training wheels. We need to know what's allowable to say to God, and so that's part of the reason for doing that.
Now, so you mentioned this written down versus extemporaneous prayer versus the two, and you talk about that to a certain degree in the opening of the book. Obviously, the tradition that we all come from, in lower church tradition and that sort of thing, there's a value for spontaneity in our prayer, and my guess is that it feels for some people, and I want to just kind of be clear when we're talking about this. There's a written down and prepared way to have a prayer and in front of you, and then it can follow the lectionary or a prayer schedule of some sort. And then there's sort of prayer that maybe many of us are familiar with that we do like around at the dinner table or whatever. But even that can be maybe feel slightly prepared. I've been in some households where
it's the same
same prayer every night. So I know my tradition tends to probably lift up the spontaneous prayer to a certain degree as maybe being more, I don't know, more authentic or transparent or something of that nature, and maybe can downplay the importance or the role that a lectionary or a prepared prayer can have. I'm wondering what your experience has been in your journey. I mean, 'cause you have a foot in kind of both worlds now, and you've written a prayer book. What what are the pros and the cons to both? Like, what would you see as if you needed to make a defense, I guess, for both ways of praying, spontaneous and written out? What would you say you see the advantages of both, and then maybe where are some of the pitfalls or challenges that lie on both forms of prayer as well?
Probably the starting point is to think in terms of context. So, what's happening in this situation? Because if we consider prayer as being conversation with God, in the same way that we have conversations with other people, context is going to determine how we decide what we're going to say. And so, if we look at the Gospels and we say, so prayer is conversation with God and Jesus is God, then every stupid thing the disciples said to Jesus is prayer.
Mhm.
So all of the spontaneous things that they did, and every time in worship they read the Psalms, which are liturgical prayers finely polished across generations. So you have, even among the disciples, both the spontaneous kind of interaction with God and the structured liturgical prayers that provide that guidance. So it's what's the context of those situations. Now, for why I started doing written prayers, I start my shift on Sundays at 8:00. There's another chaplain that's in. It starts at 7. I start at 8. So there are two of us there at 10:30 when there's the service. However, I have no idea what's going to be happening before I have to stand in front of the camera and whoever might be in the room and pray. And so it could be that I have been to a stroke. It could be that I have watched somebody die. It could be that we've been trying to find family information to get a hold. So all of those things that we do in chaplaincy, and we can talk about that later. So I come from all of that potential chaos that I can't predict into this moment. And I can be spontaneous in those moments, but it doesn't, that moment doesn't allow me to think about what was in the texts that we just read, some of which are saying things to God and saying things to each other about what we want to say to God. And so I realized that I would help myself be able to focus if I started to write.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Nope.
I was going to say, so let's kind of walk through some of these prayers that you like. Let's, for instance, on a Sunday morning, tell me a little bit about what that looks like. The structure prayer that you write down ahead of time. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
About the process?
Yeah, about the process you go for writing a prayer.
So before I pray every Sunday, this is what's nice about being predictable. I know the two texts that I'm going to read. And actually one of the Psalms, and then an Old Testament reading and a reading from the epistles. I also know the kinds of conversations that I've had with people in the hospital during the week before that.
Gotcha.
I also know what's happening in the world before that. Sometimes in the Facebook feed, sometimes, and I also know what's happening in my own heart. And I know what's happening in the lives of people around me. And so on Saturday night, because I usually write those on sometime on Saturday, I sit down with the texts of the scripture that we're going to read, the text of my conversations with people during that week, the text of my own heart, the text of what's going on in the life of my friends, so that I can, in that moment, approach God and say, here's what we're struggling with as we look at the proclamations of the texts. Here's the places where we're falling short. And so I realized that having something confessional is not a bad thing to have. um, and then to be able to say, God, here's the kind of help that we need in this moment. So there's almost always confession. There's almost always an acknowledgement of where are we right now. And there is my work in the hospital has made platitudes much more difficult to say. So when I know that on this Sunday morning, there may be somebody miscarrying that I just had a conversation with, it changes how happy I am
Mm-hmm.
in the words that I'm speaking to God on behalf of this building of 400 some beds and families and all those networks. And so for me, it's funny, I'm probably more honest rather than less honest by writing as opposed to extemporaneous. On the other hand, I'm regularly talking with people and praying for them and with them in the moment of whatever. So, but for this, because I'm representing us and myself in this context before God, that's how it works, pulling those pieces together.
Yeah. That's really helpful, and something that caught my attention when you said, because I think this applies to other people, you don't know the chaos or the circumstances that will be surrounding you going in. So if you have planned something ahead of time, if you have prepared something ahead of time, that might be the most helpful way to respond and to engage in the midst of all the rest of the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, for so many of us, as we in our spiritual lives, if we might accomplish, I don't know if accomplish is the right word, well, if we might experience or encounter some things that we would not have otherwise encountered or been open to if we wrote prayer out, if we journaled prayer, and so it's an interesting idea. John, do you feel like my sense is, and I wonder what you think about when you think about creativity in prayer, kind of engaging a more, a creative approach. I mean, from your perspective, are our prayers, are they very interesting? I mean, like, because you said like the platitudes and things like that, we can easily default, I guess, in our conversations with each other, and certainly with God, we can default to some of this rote conversation or rote things that we reply to or whatever. And I just wonder, is there more space for thinking about, because even as you said earlier, everything the disciples said, if we're taking a broader perspective on prayer and our definitions are broadening, was prayer, which I was deeply troubled when you said that. I was like, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I've considered that.
Right.
So what about creativity in prayer? What about expanding our definitions a little bit? I mean, is there room for that?
I was thinking about this earlier and realizing that y'all are way better trained theologians than I am. However, I've got more degrees in communication than you do.
Yes.
And so much of how I think about our interaction with God stems not from a theology course, but from communication, persuasion, creation of meaning, which is what my discipline of rhetoric is. And so when I come to prayer, I'm thinking about it in terms of interaction, in terms of not creating formulas and throwing, but how do we interact? So some consistency is okay. It is perfectly acceptable for me to say to Nancy, even after having been married since '83, I love you. And to use those exact words thousands of times over these years.
Yeah.
And to say, no, you need to be more creative about his. No. I love you is perfectly acceptable. I think too often, though, we can start worrying more about creativity and less about honesty. So as we're thinking about honesty in interaction with God, go back to your uncomfortableness with that statement about it counting as prayer. Part of the uncomfortableness with that is we can't believe that those kinds of things would count as prayer. And so often when we think about creativity, think about how many of the names of God can we include over a season of prayer, because we just did a sermon series on there's this name and this name and this name. So we've got to weave that into our prayer and say it in Hebrew and whatever, rather than saying, oh God, that piece of me, that's just not working. I went for a long stretch of actually writing my own prayers because my brain races. So first thing in the morning when I would sit down, my praying would happen in writing because it was the only way I could slow my thinking down enough to be able to interact with God. However, as I was writing, I would realize, oh, I didn't know I thought that.
Oh, yeah.
And so even as we think about this conversation, we had a sense of a couple of things that we wanted to talk about, but we really didn't have any idea exactly where it was going to go. And so I say things and you go, oh, and you say things and it's like, oh, this is really helpful to think this through because I haven't had to explain this before. Well, if in fact praying involves a component of that kind of interaction, then we're going to have, it's going to look like creativity, but it's not creativity for creativity's sake. It's authenticity. It's going into parts of our thinking that we never thought about. So
in our prayer, I mean, if we were able to say, is the goal authenticity? I mean, to your mind, is that what we're aiming for?
Okay, this is going to sound really churchy, and I hate sounding churchy. I think the goal of prayer is relationship with God.
Yep.
So there's a component of relationship that's authenticity, but authenticity is never the goal. Just like creativity is never the goal. Connection, relationship is what the goal is. Becoming more like Christ is what the goal is. Understanding, yeah, sorry. So it's,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
and I'm speaking as somebody who obviously works with youth and young adults who seem very preoccupied with saying the right, saying the right thing or being, and I'll just be honest with you. And I talk with a lot of other youth leaders. So there's number one, there's a gender component to this too, and maybe a maturity thing. But like John, I'll tell you, I have struggled in like group settings of like 10 or more students to have students pray aloud, for instance. And there is such a, and I get it. It's very difficult for them to check all of their.
Well, it's goes back to like the Instagramness of our society now. We can put a filter on it and edit it 3 or 4 times before we actually send it off for the world to see. And your students can't do that when they're praying aloud. They can't take that back.
Yeah. And I wonder. I mean, John, if I were coming to you and I was seeking some technical prayer counsel, and I was like, okay, John, how do I help a group of people that are in community with each other, that are in this particular case that are Jesus followers, or most are Jesus followers, but they're really caught up on praying in front of each other, or having any sort of out loud, praying out loud for one another component. What can I do? Because our audience is parents as well, and parents have these concerns too, like in their child's spiritual development. What are things that we can do to maybe help facilitate prayer, to help encourage prayer, to because for me it's like, okay, if there's any hurdles that I'm putting up unknowingly, I want to remove those. And I really want so much as a pastor. I mean, I want anybody to in a deeper prayer life. You will never lose. You will never lose with a deeper prayer life. Like there is. So, what do you think? What are what am I doing wrong, John? No. How can we help? How can we help our young people? How can we help those that are a little bit scared of prayer? Maybe even in the one-on-one setting or group setting, or even maybe individually.
If if we were sitting in the same room, there would be a whiteboard right now.
Yes,
of a list of stuff.
Beautiful.
Because I started a list of the things so that I remember what my thoughts are. So I've got 4 of them right now. But one of the questions is, why are you so worried about people praying out loud in front of each other?
Mm-hmm.
See, we create this performance expectation. So if the measure of our faith in God is our ability to pray out loud in front of other people, what we just did is we made it incredibly hard for the introverts.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, you've got to learn how to perform.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole worrying about getting it right is a performance thing. And now we just created performance anxiety, speech anxiety about prayer, which adds a level that's just like, wait, what did we just do?
Right.
So a second thing in relation to that is, what is our picture of who God is? So if our picture of who God is somebody that we've got to get the formulas exactly right for, well, then that creates that other thing of expectations and fear. And what if I get the words wrong? What if I use the wrong start? When all of the prayers in this book start with God, period. And one of my bosses said, who had read it through, and this book is part of a series of books with him, he said, you might want to explain why you're doing that. And I realized that I do that because God is not troubled by getting all the words right in the address part. And a way to understand that is a thing that I did in class one day. I was teaching spiritual formation. I think is where I did it, or a men's Bible study. And I just looked around the room and I said, so who's your favorite member of the Trinity? It's like, oh, what do I do with that question? Because it's like, if I pick the wrong one, the others are going to be mad at me, you know? And, but when we start thinking in those terms, it's like, oh, wait, yeah, there is personality. And we could say, Father, I have a really hard time talking to you because I know people who have horrible experiences with fathers. And so I have no idea when I'm talking to other people, talking to you in front of other people, how to talk to. So if it's okay with you, can I talk to the Spirit? Since you're God. I mean, now step back. What I just said was praying. So I was actually talking to God about how to talk to God. So I think that would be the third thing. So why are we worrying about the performance part? Second is, what's the picture of God that we're painting? And then whatever that third thing was, of broadening our scope of what it means to have conversation with God. I am actually willing, when I'm at bedside, and I've done this in other contexts, but when I'm at bedside praying with somebody, to look at them and say, wait, what was your name again? In the middle of praying. And it's like,
yeah.
But what I want is for them to have a picture that God's open to those kinds of interactions.
Yeah.
We are not going to get punished for not having it right. Because as you know, with your kids, the worst thing is not that they call you by the wrong name. The worst thing is that they don't talk to you at all.
Right.
And so you're willing to have conversation. You're willing for them to say things wrong, and to provide. But if you across time, I mean, if you started setting up barriers to say, no, you have to say it exactly this way, across time, your kids are going to stop talking to you.
Yeah.
And so I think that God's incredibly open to multiple ways of talking with him. I think another piece is I think that this is where written prayers could be helpful. So in a group kind of setting, to say, let's read this together, because what it's doing is it's putting into words, it's putting into to being able to hear some thoughts. So it's taking the thoughts, putting them into words, and then allowing it to be heard, and it gives people those models. So that's some things.
Yeah.
And here's the reality, Joel. I bet you're doing okay.
Yeah. I think absolutely. Well, because the deal is that you're, like you said, the litmus test is not whether they can pray out loud. The desire when they're in any student's growth is are they demonstrating fruit of the Spirit? Is there transformation happening in their life at whatever rate that might be happening, or however they're encountering Jesus? And just because they can, I don't know. I've heard plenty of students. I mean, and this is, I shouldn't relegate it to students only. I've heard plenty of people that can pray out loud just fine, and then you find out later in some way or another that their relationship with God was deeply troubled, or something was, there were major things going on, and that basically their expressed life was a facade or a safeguard against other things. And so
Oh, absolutely. Because
yeah.
what happened is they learned the performance part.
Yeah.
So we're able to play the part of good Christian, and that's enough. I mean, obviously it's not, but for being accepted in circles, that's enough.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, all of you need to be aware of the good prayer in your family. I think that's really what we've concluded. Be on the lookout. No. So, John, I will say I'm super excited. Our church staff here, my plan is to share your book with all of them as we prepare for Advent. I'm so grateful the book came out when it did, as we're looking at, because we're able to sort of prayerfully think about, us church people. We're thinking about Christmas already. We're thinking about Advent already, and what it could be. But something that struck me, John, is some of the early, at the very first prayers and entering into the Advent season. This year in particular, I think we're so fitting for what we are going through as a country right now, as a culture, and that just I was like, I'm sitting there reading. I was reading it at my kids were. I was at my in-laws' house. My kids were out in the pool with the rest of them. I'm sitting on their couch, and I am having like a pretty like I was deeply confronted by the words, I guess, of these prayers, in thinking about praying them in the Advent season, as we are entering in some very uncertain territory here, as we're trying to get schools back online and we're trying to do these sort of things. And I just thought to myself, if we almost could be, I guess, put this way, we should probably be praying Advent prayers right now. Is what it felt like. So what I appreciate about the book is that you're following a schedule, but then you're also, in the titles, you say, hey, it's for this particular reading, but also for instances where you're feeling this way, or where if you're working through disappointment, or these sort of things. It seems to me that that's kind of the beauty of the, whatever you want to call it, the lectionary, any sort of scheduled reading, is the prayers are not isolated to those particular instances, but they can speak to different places, different times, and so I guess I felt like, boy, I know this is for Advent, but boy, is it really deeply impacting me in this moment as I'm thinking about what's going on now and what may be going on in the future as well. Does that make sense? I just thought that was a really interesting component about the prayer, I guess. So
it makes complete sense. as we're recording this tomorrow, what the post for my 300 Words a Day blog is a prayer that I wrote for, I can't remember if it's Epiphany or Lent, but as I was reading through, I thought, oh, well, this just makes a ton of sense for right now. And I think that's a secret of, oh, this is terrible. I was going to say that's a secret of good written prayers, but I realized, well, that's just awful. Or arrogant.
Yeah.
I think the secret of honest praying, wherever it happens, is that it actually has a timelessness as it connects with God and Scripture. So
let me ask you this a little bit. Do you, either you, Joel or John, when you were reading lectionary type prayers, written down prayers, do you guys have trouble making that personal, or do you have any advice on how to make that personal? If it's a prayer that you yourself did not write, if it's you're reading it out of a book, how do you make that personal to yourself? Either one of you can answer that. I don't care.
Yeah, what do you think, John?
well, I wrote all these, so I don't know how to answer that. How that said, a way to personalize it is to actually read it 2 or 3 times so that it allows to work into your heart. Because that's what we say about reading Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So as you read any of the Psalms that are God-word Psalms, so it's a prayer. As you read through Nehemiah, there's this massive, well-crafted confessional prayer in the middle of the book of Nehemiah that's saying, God, here's what you did, here's what you did, here's what you did, here's what you did, here's what we did, here's what we did, here's what we, and it ends with, you did all this, and now here we are in the land you promised us, slaves of somebody else. To read that enough that it begins to represent my heart is a way to address that. So it's possible just to read it as rote reading, absolutely. But I think because in public prayer from the front, or whether it's geographically from the front or the back, but in that role of leading, our job is to be praying on behalf of, to be leading people into, to be representing. And so we've got to have that ownership of it in our hearts as well. And I think that as we do that, so as we read it 2 or 3 times, as we let it work into us, there begins to be that ownership.
Sure.
Yeah, like I mean, and some of these just are immediately, I mean, to your point, Andy, like, so a prayer for, so this is from John's book, a prayer for the second Sunday of Advent. God, I am supposed to have answers and clarity and direction. I am supposed to offer structure and encouragement and order. I am supposed to, and I cannot. Or better, at the moment, in this moment, I have few words, little clarity. If that is not my life right now, if that is not, and quite honestly, I hope it's not my life in November. I hope it's not my life in whatever date the second Sunday of Advent falls on. But so some of these things, I don't know. I think if we're just honest and real, there is an application. There is an immediate personalizing. Because some of the things in there, it's like I naturally in my spirit, like depending on the mood I was in when I was encountering them, I want to distance myself from the words because they are too close to home. They are, and I think that's what probably elicited a lot of the emotion that I was experiencing. You know, these words of uncertainty, these feelings of I'm supposed to but can't, and this, like in the season we're in, so many people feel. I had a long, lengthy conversation with my lead pastor today, and it was about how I feel like so many things have been taken from me that are like tools, basically, for ministry. You know, like I normally have these tools in my tool bag to do ministry, and many of them have been taken away, and I don't have control over that. And the control piece is, just like deeply disturbing to me, and then I'm like, that's how I should be. But then in that moment, like he was kind of directing me through some prayer. It was like, that's really the things that I should be praying. But according to Jon here, by the way, I was praying as I was telling him all these things that, like God was in the room and heard. So yeah, I think if we opened ourselves up to any lectionary, book of prayer, this resource, there are some immediately applicable. If we just recognize the situation we're in and sit in a little bit, I think it's immediately applicable. But so yeah, as far as the book is concerned, again, we will have a link.
We'll link to it in our show notes, dudesanddadspodcast.com.
Yep, that's right. It'll be all over Jon's going to sell millions of copies of this.
If I were good, Joel, I'd say, well, you should be reading one of my 2 Advent books, not my, but.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway.
Jon's got many books. In fact, let's just link all the books. Let's just, all of his books will be on over at dudesanddadspodcast.com. So the other thing, Jon, is we're talking here, and you brought it up. I mean, so we haven't said this overtly. Jon does have his PhD in is it rhetorical studies, communication studies, rhetoric? I always want to use the fancy words.
Rhetorical theory and criticism.
There we go. Yes. University of Texas. Is that right?
Yep. UT Austin.
I was waiting for the horns. So Jon, my sense is that we are living in a time of difficult communication, and I don't have to spend very long on. There's been a few days here recently. I've been like, I'm taking Facebook off, and I'm never going to return to it. But specifically, I've been thinking a lot about how followers of Jesus are talking to other followers of Jesus or other non-followers of Jesus, how they are communicating with them in this season that we're in, and how much of the communication sat in my heart. And I'm trying to understand, as not just as a pastor, not just as a theologian, whatever, but just as a fellow Jesus follower, what I can do to help what I see as broken communication between folks. What's your sense, Jon? I mean, what are you seeing right now? What do you, apart from good Sunday school answer is that we need Jesus, we need the power of Christ in all of these things. What do we need to be doing as Jesus followers to promote? I guess first of all, what's the illness at work here, and what is the healing, the healing hope and the fix, quote unquote fix? Not that it's a perfect one, but what do we need to be paying attention to? What can we do? What are you noticing? You're the communication expert, so listen to how well I'm articulating this right now. It's so great, so fluid. Anyway, what do you think about the mess that's out there?
I share your sadness and your frustration, because as I read I go to Jesus' prayer for last conversation with the disciples, and then his prayer for the disciples and for those that follow. And there's this clear articulation of, if you love me, keep my commands. And here's my command, that you love one another. And our inability to understand how to be loving for all of us and each of us is a huge problem. And I think that we spend so much time trying to respond or react. It's more reacting. And we think that we have to talk, and we think that we have to make points in arguments. Um, and we think that sharing something, so liking something or clicking share on something without even exploring the truth of it, um, counts as something. And yet every time we do that, it's creating barriers and divides and that kind of stuff. I decided, it's more than a decade ago, so probably a decade and a half ago, that I will not talk about what I believe on political positions at all. And I once had an elder at a church I was in say, okay, I understand that you don't want to do that, but just tell me.
Right.
And
Right.
my reason for that is, if I am supposed to be representing Jesus Christ in my words and actions, I screw that up enough as it is. And if I have to add in other kinds of things to that that will be divisive in ways that have nothing to do with the kingdom, I'm creating things that are awful. And so it's hard for people to figure out what denomination I'm part of. And I'm happy with that. It's hard for people to figure out political parties. It's hard for people to figure out what teams or sports I like. I mean, I'll come down hard on yellow cake with chocolate frosting. It's my favorite dessert.
Amen. Amen.
Not expect that, did you? However, for my birthday last week, we had pie.
Yes.
Because most of the people in my family like pie. I don't need to eat a whole cake myself. And I'm perfectly happy eating Nancy's pie as well. And I think that too often we work too hard to win argumentative points. And we're not trying to figure out relational kinds of things. And so I think that in my work as a chaplain, what I realize is the person in front of me is the person that I have to care about. Chaplaincy is an in the moment kind of thing, because you never know what's happening, and so you got to deal with the thing that's right in front of you.
Yep.
And so my best work is how we often say, how can we best help people on the worst day of their lives? Well, that's about love. And so if rather than constantly trying to win points, we're looking at the person in front of us and saying, how can I love this person? It doesn't scale.
Yeah.
At all.
Yep.
But I don't think love is about scaling. Jesus never says love as many people as you can. It's, are you loving?
Yeah.
So I put this person in front of you. Are you going to love this one? I put this person in front of you. You're going to love this one?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I mean, part of it is, this question of who is my neighbor, and it seems in the context that Jesus is talking about, it's like, who's right in front of you, who is in front of you in that moment, because we want heart-shaped rules, I think, about who am I supposed to get along with and who am I not supposed to get along with, and and for me personally, I mean. And John, I know you probably secretly know this, but you were very Anabaptist-y there for a hot second. So I appreciated that. It spoke to my heart because you were on my you were clearly on my team for a second. But but there is and friends, I want to say this, and whether those of you listening that are followers of Jesus or not, and Andy and I have always said, we don't call this a Christian podcast, but we are two Christians that are talking about what's important to us, and obviously
this is important to
us. The need to be right, it seems very important culturally right now, and I just want to say the need to love people well needs to take. We have to get back to that being a precedent. And have I loved people well?
Mm-hmm.
And then as I entered in conversation, I've got a few conversations that I think are probably up on my horizon that I'm really not looking forward to. And the thing that I'm asking myself right now is, how will those people, those individuals, know that they are loved when I enter into that conversation with them? And the answer to that is probably different for every one of. I mean, it's slightly different for each one of them. So it's like communication. I mean, obviously, John's got a PhD in it, so we can just go ahead and say communication takes some work. There are multiple components to it. We have to be thoughtful, which it seems like thoughtful communication is at times in short supply around us. But yeah, what do you think, John?
Well, I want to add something.
Yeah.
Actually, two things there. One of them is we forget that the misunderstanding that we have is a result of the fall. It's a result of Babel. And so we have these dreams that if only I could just do it this way, we would. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The second piece of that, however, is that on Pentecost, the Holy Spirit brings understanding across massive cultural boundaries. And so our selfishness is part of the misunderstanding that's necessarily there and will be till the end of time. But God's interest is in helping people understand, particularly as it makes people aware of him and his healing and his power. And so God's in favor of relationship.
Yeah.
Now here's the other piece. So that was actually only one. The second piece is this. The number of times that I'm in a hospital, I'm visiting with somebody who has come in an emergency situation. In the course of conversation, I say, so do you have a congregation that you're part of? And they say, I used to, but, and then they'll tell me these things that happened. But then I say, that's fine. This is not an audit. This is sometimes it's a wanting to find out how to pray. But I also find that then when I talk with God in their presence, the number of times they end up in tears, not because I make people cry, but because they have this realization that church is part of how God works, and churches are part of how God works, but God mostly loves them.
Yeah. Amen.
Cares about them. And in this moment, he's not worried about the buildings and stuff. He wants them.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's the opposite of liturgical prayer. But in that moment saying, yeah, God, Joel and Andy are doing their best to figure this out. And they are working really hard. And they're doing really good, but they're running into these issues. And I don't know what they are, but you know what they are, God. And can you help them, give them a wisdom that goes beyond anything they ever imagined, which is what James says to do. Ask for wisdom,
That's right.
And then when we have that idea that never, ever popped into our mind before, it's entirely possible that that's God answering that prayer for wisdom.
Yeah.
And going back to talking with kids about prayer, that's a way to do it. So what are the things God says to ask him for? Well, wisdom. Okay. Peace that makes no sense. So in moments that it makes no sense to have peace, well, let's tell God about these things. And then let's find out if in the pit of our stomach, there is something opposite of that fear.
Yeah. Yeah. So John's alluded to a few things here as far as, positions he's been in the chaplaincy. But John, what do you, first of all, let's ask the baseline question. What in the world do chaplains do? What, and maybe that's a broad question. Maybe it looks different in different settings or different places. But broadly speaking, maybe we just say from your perspective, like, what's the goal of a chaplain? Why are they there? What are they there for? And what are maybe some things that y'all engage in that are lesser known, behind the green curtain, as I like to say?
Yeah, I think how we do it is different than how lots of places do it. So I can speak from my experience. One of the things that we try to do is to be a non-invasive intentional presence. So we're not coming in to try and give answers. We're often trying to be with people as they're trying to figure out answers. And I think that many of our tools are silence, are listening. In our place, chaplains show up anytime somebody comes into the ER with an accident, with a stroke, with a heart attack, post-arrest, those kinds of things. And we're the ones who make sure for sure that family has been notified, that we used to have to lock up valuables, but right now with restrictions, that's a little bit of a different thing. We connect with family if they come in without a name. So if they come in as a doe, we're the ones that help find their name. We will do lots of interfacing with staff, and then sometimes actually talking to the patients, but lots of times they aren't able to talk. So we're that connection out to other people. We show up every time there's a death. So we're the ones that are the, what funeral home are you going to want to use? So we have that administrative component and the component of this is hard. I'm sorry for your loss. And so in those deaths, we're there, again, to be present, to actually help people move away from having to make sense of it in the moment, because it's really hard to make sense of anything in that moment of death. We sometimes actually show up when somebody wants somebody to pray with them before surgery. We are sometimes part of when somebody is having a vent withdrawn. They're being taken off a ventilator or other breathing apparatus. Family wants us to stand there with them. So we are often caring for other coworkers because especially right now where visitors have not been able to be around as much. So when I'm sitting next to a nurse after a family member has just died and the family can't be there, so they're at a distance, so the nurse is talking to them and then I'm talking to them. After we hang up, then I turn and talk to the nurse because the family is feeling terrible because their loved one died alone. And what I know is that for the last 3 hours, this nurse has been there, keeping them from being alone.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of care, which again is listening. It's acknowledging that this is hard. We try to figure out in ministry how to make things scale. So we try to figure out how do we get more impact and how do we get more people and how do we get more offerings of events, more offerings sometimes too, but
that too. Yeah.
but more offerings of events, more programmatic things. And in chaplaincy, it's like the opposite of that. We're saying, okay, in this moment, life sucks for you, and I'm here.
Yeah.
And by virtue of my being here, God is here. So it's not, and I think lots of times people think that chaplaincy is an evangelism thing. So it's like, I never had a chance to talk to this person about Jesus, but you're there. So would you go see him and tell them all about Jesus?
Right.
And I'm kind of like, wait, they know you.
Right.
And they've been talking to you for like your whole life. Why, So if I came back from the dead, why would that be helpful to them?
Yeah. Okay, so John, as you were, going from, you'd been in vocational ministry as a pastor for a good set of time, and then you transitioned into the chaplaincy. What surprised you going from that ministry world to the ministry world you're in now in chaplaincy? Was there anything that surprised you or like caught you off guard, or like things that you noticed that were in contrast to what you had previously done?
As I think about it, one of the things that was most surprising to me is that I could do it.
Yeah.
Because I was moving from about 15 years of executive pastor role, where you're trying to fix things, you're trying to anticipate, you're trying to be the person in the cracks all the time. And suddenly I'm in chaplaincy where it's in the moment, and it's life or death kinds of things. And nobody cares where the coffee maker goes. All you care about is how do you navigate this? And I discovered that I actually could do that. So that was kind of a surprise. Um, Another surprise is that pastoral care often is across a long time. So you have lifetimes to work with people. You marry them, you dedicate their baby, you do the ceremony for that baby when they grow up. And in chaplaincy, often you are doing a whole lifetime of care in about 15 minutes to half an hour. Um, and so that shift from long-term into short, intense was a surprise. I think another surprise was what we talk about as continuity of care, where I'm doing my piece and then I hand it off to another chaplain and then they hand it off to another chaplain. And so I don't have to be responsible for everything. And I think many of us in vocational ministry have the sense that we've got to hold it all together forever and there's nobody to hand off to. And we're doing tough stuff, but we get to hand off to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When it comes to like, I don't know how deep and penetrating a question this is, but do you live life personally for yourself? Do you live life differently unto yourself and with others differently? So are things different now in light of your chaplaincy role? Is there been kind of any sort of lifestyle or perspective shift in kind of your world outside of the hospital walls?
Yeah, in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is church was work, and now I'm not in a congregation as part of the work, and I have to be at the hospital every Sunday. And Nancy comes in and plays the piano for the chapel service, and there may not be anybody there, so it feels like a small church on a Sunday night when there used to be those services of one person does everything up in front and his wife comes and plays the piano. And so that feels really odd. However, it means that we are not part of another congregation. And it took a long time to begin to find that. A second component of that is the stuff that I deal with and then the stuff that Nance deals with vicariously is way different than a lot of other people are dealing with. And so when I have finished a shift dealing with 3 deaths and I watched 2 of them happen, I kind of need to figure out how to talk about that. And so finding community to be able to talk about that is challenging. And so we end up talking amongst ourselves as chaplains. But I think that becomes an interesting shift. And then, though I don't speak politically, when I'm in a situation where I watch people with a particular diagnosis that people are saying, well, that's a hoax. It's like, okay, but I just watched them die and I think they really did. And I don't want to make light of it, but so some of those things become challenges too.
We as a congregation have just navigated our first death specifically, and as you are probably aware, Clark County is not doing great on the COVID numbers, and I'll be honest with you, John. I am really prayerfully asking the question what my role is to help everybody enter in, being arm in arm together in this thing that just seems like it could really rip us apart if we're not being intentional about some things. And so as you mentioned, there are real things. People are, I guess, if nothing else, people are really dying or becoming very, very close to death or having long-term implications to their health because of what is happening here. So that's a real thing. So,
but I think in that, Joel, is what's important to us in care, and that is there's all of the swirling stuff, but at this moment there is a family that's from whatever the cause is dealing with a death.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And there are questions in that family about whether they've caught it, and there are questions about what should they have done, and there are all those kinds of questions, and forget the rest of the that's a real deep grief issue. And I think that all of us in congregations, all of us as followers of Jesus, have this opportunity to say, what does it look like to love in the middle of this chaos and loss and pain? And part of it is just getting really better at acknowledging that this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
There's no verse that takes away the fact that this is hard.
Amen.
Well, we want to thank you for coming out to our show today. We really appreciate both your thoughts on prayer and your thoughts on chaplaincy that you've experienced and shared with us tonight. Thanks again for being on our show tonight.
Thanks. It's awesome.
Before we let you go, though,
we have a little bit of punishment that we have to put every guest through.
Oops.
Oh,
that's not the punishment.
The crickets are a good sound effect, though.
They are, but that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, anyways, here we go.
Now it's time for Dudes and Dads Pop Quiz.
You know what? That's what happens when your soundboard gets rebooted in the middle of the recording.
There we go.
Anyways, so if you've not joined us before, the Dudes and Dads Pop Quiz is just a time where Joel and I like to ask our guests 5 or 6 or 7 questions, just random questions that we want to get to know them better. So
that's right, and because these people are real people. They have deep, dark secrets that we're trying to uncover, and we may not get there with John tonight, but we are going to ask him some random questions, and we'll see what happens.
I know not to ask him political party or religious affiliation or.
He's pretty much eliminated all pop quiz questions that we could possibly.
But I will go ahead and start here. John, when you first started dating your wife, what was the first place that you guys went to on a date?
We went on our first date 2 weeks after we had decided to get married.
Oh, okay.
And 2 weeks before we got engaged.
All right.
So it was Red Lobster.
I like Red Lobster.
Nothing says love like Red Lobster, as far as I'm concerned. John, my question is going to be, John is a runner, by the way. That did not actually come up in the interview, but he is a runner. John, what's the go-to running shoe for you?
Brooks. I just got a new pair of Brooks Adrenalines. I used up, wore out with about 600 miles, a pair of Adrenaline 18s, and now I'm got a new pair of Adrenaline 20s for my birthday.
Oh, so
nice.
Exciting.
Nice.
You can see the excitement on his face. That's a true runner right there. He's like, oh, yes.
I actually know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Oh, man. You threw me off. I wasn't expecting a running shoe
I went
question.
running shoe. Yep.
So my question would be musical taste. What's your favorite musical genre?
I don't know, because I gave up a lot of listening to music.
All right.
So if you looked at my Pandora, one of the channels is a Mozart Bach channel, and the other one is a David Crowder channel, which has some The Fray mixed in and U2.
As it would, because they
do. They go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It makes sense. John, what if you could say like who? Okay, either. Well, it's a 2-part question. I need an answer for both parts. Your favorite communicator, both no longer living and currently living. So that's the 1 and 2 piece. What do you think?
Probably Eugene Peterson for the deceased.
You've stumped him.
I have a really hard time picking stuff currently.
Yeah.
However,
duly noted.
probably Guy Raz,
Yes.
who does How I Built This as a podcast, used to do the TED Radio Hour. And what impresses me is his capacity to ask questions.
He also does the What in the World. So it's a kids show through NPR podcast. Wow in the World. Yeah.
Yeah.
My kids love it, and it was so funny is I didn't realize it was Guy Raz at first because he's so animated and like creative, and when it's so interesting. He's got many voices. He kind of covers that's cool.
All right, so my last question, and Joel, you can keep asking away, but this is my last question here. What do you do on your free time? So when you get out of the hospital, you come home after you've decompressed a little bit. What do you do? Well, running, but what besides running would you say is a free time activity for you?
Spending time with Nancy. So we walk. We watch HGTV or DIY, and I rub her feet, and she falls asleep. So that's fits in the dudes and dads kind of thing.
That's right. So. Thank you. That's good advice, by the way, for everybody listening. Just rub your wife's feet. Come on. Jackie doesn't like me touching her feet, however. I should just mention that. So that's been off the table.
See, but for me, I rub Julie's feet, but then I fall asleep. So as we're watching TV. So I don't know that that's a romantic option for me.
Gotcha. Well, my concluding question will be this is an interesting way to ask this. John, what book should I be reading right now?
A book that you should be reading is Rob Moll, Moll. I can't remember if it's called Dying Well, something, or The Art of Dying, I think it is. Rob was a writer for CT and some other people, mountain climber, and I think it was last summer he fell and died. But as part of his time at CT, he wrote this book, The Art of Dying Well, or something like that, that helps us think through some of the realities of dying. So I think that's a good book to be reading. I've seen The End of You by Lee Warren. Lee is a surgeon, a neurosurgeon, and does a really good job of facing death kinds of things. This tells you something about me. And then the third one is No Matter How Small. One of my colleagues and his wife just wrote that about miscarriage and stillbirth. And it's not the book to read when you're in the middle of that. But if you are working with people who are walking through that, it's a really good book to be reading.
Yes. Well, if you know anything about this show, infant loss, stillbirth is a topic near and dear.
Right. Our family experienced it. So with the death of the fourth child of mine. So.
Yeah, and we always like to plug, and we're heavy supporters of the organization Hope Mommies, which has a chapter here in northern Indiana, and so that's a great topic actually. Just to we've talked about it previously here, but I would just say this is not part of the pop quiz, but the whole child loss community is a kind of a secret community, but it is prevalent and surprisingly prevalent actually. And so we have a heart for all that. So no matter how small. Okay, so I got 3 book see, do you see how I baited him into this? I got 3 book recommendations. Yeah.
And we're part of that community too. So
Okay.
Yes.
years ago, I wrote. I'm not much of a poem writer, just a prayer writer, but wrote a poem called "Welcome to the Club."
Oh. Yeah.
And it's that. There's no secret handshake, but it's a secret heartbreak.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
Yeah.
Jon, my friend, thank you a million times over for talking with us. This has been this has been a little bit of a dream of mine to have you on, and we're just grateful that you can kind of share some things with us. The perspective is helpful, and we're gonna again. I said for our congregation, the book on prayer, actually many of the resources are super helpful. Jon, let's see. You've got 2 websites, so you blog over at 300 Words a Day.
Yep, 300wordsaday.com. And then I write about care kinds of stuff at socialmediachaplain.com.
Yes. And so, yes, and he's got the mug, which everybody has to have the mug. That's good. So, Jon, we're grateful for you. We're thankful for the ministry that you're engaged in, and we just want to say thanks for being with us, my friend.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity.
You
This
bet.
was awesome. Thanks.
Guys, you can check all of our show notes out and all of the other episodes over at dudesanddadspodcast.com. We would love to hear from you, our listeners. If you get a chance, go ahead and open up your email client and send an email to dudesanddadspodcast@gmail.com. Joel, any closing thoughts?
First of all, I can tell that you're in IT because you said email client. And secondly, I just want to say we're grateful for all of you guys for checking in with us, tuning in. Can't wait to talk to you next time. Until later, my friends, grace
and
peace.